The holographic display flickered as Dr. Xylith's tentacles adjusted the quantum probability field diagram. The respected Arcturian physicist's color-shifting membrane reflected their frustration as they addressed the packed lecture hall at the Galactic Science Academy. And so, we remain unable to maintain quantum entanglement beyond 3.7 parsecs without significant degradation. They concluded, their voice resonators emanating defeat. The Kardashev barrier, as we've come to call it, continues to prevent practical quantum communication across galactic distances. In the front row, Sarah Chen fought the urge to raise her hand. As the only human in the advanced quantum physics program, she had learned to be cautious about speaking up. The last thing she needed was another lecture about how primitive human scientific understanding was compared to the gathered species of the Galactic Alliance. But something about the equation floating in the air before them nagged at her consciousness. The solution seemed so obvious, it was almost embarrassing. Finally, she couldn't contain herself any longer. "Dr. Xylith," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What if we're approaching this all wrong?" The lecture hall fell silent. Several of her classmates' bioluminescent patches flickered in what she had learned to recognize as embarrassment. Dr. Xylith's membrane rippled in subtle patterns of azure and gold, confusion mixed with curiosity. "Wrong, Student Chen. This framework has been refined by the finest minds across 12 species over 3 centuries. Sarah stood, approaching the holographic display. "Yes, but look at the foundation equation. We're trying to force quantum entanglement to behave according to standard spacetime rules. What if instead—" She reached into the display, her hands moving through the glowing symbols with practiced ease. "We consider that spacetime itself might be entangled." The silence in the hall deepened. Dr. Xylith's tentacles went still, a sign of intense focus among Arcturians. "Explain." "On Earth, we have this old physics thought experiment called Wheeler's delayed choice. It suggests that quantum events might influence the past. What if we're not just dealing with entangled particles, but entangled moments? The degradation we're seeing isn't about distance, it's about time dilation." She continued manipulating the equation, adding variables that represented temporal quantum states. The holographic display shifted, the complex mathematical structure morphing into something new, something that seemed to pulse with its own inner logic. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Xylith whispered, their voice resonators barely active. "But surely you realize the implications. If your hypothesis is correct, it would mean that the universe is far more interconnected than we imagined." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. We've been so focused on the particles themselves, we forgot to consider the fabric they exist within." A Meridian student in the back, their crystalline form refracting the room's light, spoke up. "But this defies all established quantum theory. It's impossible." "Impossible." Sarah turned to face her classmate. 300 years ago, your people thought faster than light travel was impossible. Humans thought it was impossible too. But here we all are, studying together light years from our homeworlds. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from questioning our most basic assumptions. Dr. Xylith had begun rapidly inputting data into their personal quantum computer, their tentacles moving in a blur. The math works. By all the ancient stars, it actually works. "Student Chen, do you realize what you've done?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I think so. But I also think we're going to need to build some new equipment to test this. The current quantum resonators won't be able to detect temporal entanglement patterns." Yes, Dr. Xylith's membrane had shifted to a bright, excited purple. "We'll need to completely redesign our approach. The Council will need to be notified. This could revolutionize galactic communication." As the lecture hall erupted in excited discussion, Sarah returned to her seat, trying to hide her smile. She pulled out her tablet and began sketching designs for a temporal quantum resonator, already anticipating the challenges ahead. The hard part wasn't going to be proving her theory. It would be convincing the Galactic Science Council to look past their preconceptions and consider that sometimes the simplest solutions came from thinking differently rather than thinking bigger. Her tablet pinged with an incoming message. It was from Dr. Xylith. "See me after class. We have much to discuss, and I suspect the council will want a formal presentation." Sarah's smile widened. She'd been preparing for this moment ever since she'd first set foot in the academy. It was time to show the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their knowledge. It was their ability to think outside the box, to see patterns where others saw only chaos, and to question everything, even the most fundamental assumptions of reality itself. The laboratory hummed with the soft resonance of quantum computers as Sarah Chen stared at the dismantled remains of what had once been a standard quantum resonator. Parts lay scattered across the workbench, their internal crystals glowing faintly in the dim light. 3 weeks had passed since her theoretical breakthrough, and now came the harder part, proving it. "You do realize that modifying Academy equipment without proper authorization is grounds for immediate expulsion." The voice came from senior researcher Vex 427, their robotic frame hovering silently beside her workstation. The mechanical being's optical sensors whirred as they focused on her improvised modifications. "Good thing I have authorization then," Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. She held up her tablet, displaying Dr. Xylith's approval signature. Besides, these resonators were scheduled for recycling anyway. Better to use them for research than have them broken down for parts. Vex 427's processors hummed in what Sarah had learned to recognize as disapproval. "The Council's preliminary review board meets in 2 days. You cannot seriously expect to have a working prototype by then." "Watch me," Sarah muttered, carefully adjusting the temporal phase modulator she constructed from modified Earth technology and Arcturian quantum crystals. It wasn't pretty, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to work. The door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss, admitting Dr. Xylith. Their membrane showed swirling patterns of concern. "Student Chen, the council is expressing reservations. Several members are questioning the wisdom of allowing a representative of a Level 3 civilization to challenge established quantum theory." Sarah finally looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "Let me guess. Delegate Moros is leading the opposition." "Indeed." Dr. Xylith's tentacles twisted in agitation. "The Quantarian delegation believes your theory threatens the very foundation of their society's technological supremacy. They're demanding we follow standard testing protocols, which would take years." "Years we don't have," Sarah replied, standing to face her mentor. "The quantum degradation affecting galactic communications is getting worse. Every day we wait, more colony worlds lose contact with the network. We need a solution now, not after years of committee reviews." She gestured to her modified resonator. "This isn't about proving humans are cleverer than anyone else. It's about solving a problem that affects everyone. Sometimes you have to break protocol to make progress." An admirably noble sentiment, Vex 427 interjected, their metallic voice carrying the hint of sarcasm. "But nobility will not protect you from the consequences if you fail." The last researcher who challenged Quantarian quantum theory was stripped of their credentials and exiled to the outer colonies. Sarah smiled, reaching for a tool that looked like a cross between a screwdriver and a laser pointer. "Then I better not fail, right?" The next 48 hours passed in a blur of calculations, adjustments, and more than a few mild explosions. Sarah worked without break, sustained by stimulants and determination. Dr. Xylith came and went, providing resources and support where they could, while Vex 427 remained a constant presence, documenting everything with their perfect mechanical memory. Finally, with just hours to spare before the review board meeting, Sarah stepped back from her creation. The modified resonator looked nothing like its original form. Earth-made circuit boards merged with alien crystals in ways that would make most engineers cringe, but the quantum readings were undeniable. "It's ready," she announced, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We can begin the demonstration as soon as the council arrives." "Fascinating," Vex 427 commented, scanning the device. "You've completely bypassed the standard quantum isolation protocols. By all known theories, this should create an immediate cascade failure." "Known theories being the key word there," Sarah replied, checking the final calibrations. "Sometimes you have to trust that the universe is smarter than our theories about it." Dr. Xyleth's membrane had taken on a complex pattern that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. "The council members are already gathering in the main chamber." "Are you certain about this, Student Chen?" "There's no shame in requesting more time." Sarah shook her head, gathering her presentation materials. "The universe doesn't care about our protocols or our politics. It just is. Either my theory works or it doesn't. Time to find out which." As they prepared to leave the lab, Sarah caught her reflection in one of the darkened screens. She looked exhausted, her lab coat wrinkled, her hair hastily tied back. Not exactly the picture of scientific dignity the council would expect. But then again, she wasn't there to meet their expectations. She was there to shatter them. "One last thing," she said, turning to her companions. "No matter what happens in there, thank you both for letting me try this my way." Vex 427's optical sensors flickered in what might have been amusement. "Your way is precisely what concerns us, Student Chen. But perhaps that is exactly what we need right now." Together, they made their way to the council chamber, where the fate of not just Sarah's theory, but potentially the future of galactic communication itself, would be decided. The halls of the academy had never felt longer or more silent as they walked toward what would either be a revolutionary breakthrough or the end of Sarah Chen's scientific career. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Science Academy formed a perfect sphere, its walls embedded with quantum crystals that pulsed with a soft blue light. Tiered seating rose in concentric circles, filled with representatives from dozens of species. At the center stood a single platform where Sarah Chen now placed her modified resonator, trying to ignore the whispers and subtle movements from above. High Commissioner Lyra, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate metallic framework, spoke first. Their voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder. "The Council recognizes Sarah Chen, human exchange student, presenting a challenge to established quantum communication theory. You may proceed." Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself. In the front row, Dr. Xyleth's membrane showed encouraging patterns of gold and green, while Vex 427's optical sensors remained fixed on her modified device. "Distinguished members of the Council," Sarah began, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. "For 3 centuries, we've accepted the Kardashev barrier as an immutable law of quantum physics. We've built our entire galactic communication network around working within its limitations. Today, I'm here to demonstrate that we've been looking at the problem backwards." A harsh buzz of disapproval came from the Quantarian delegation. Delegate Moros, their crystalline form glowing with barely contained agitation, leaned forward. "You propose to overturn 300 years of tested theory with a device built in 2 days. This is precisely the kind of reckless behavior we've come to expect from humanity." Sarah smiled, a gesture that seemed to unsettle several council members. "Actually, what I'm proposing is something much simpler. I'm suggesting we stop fighting against the universe's natural tendencies and start working with them." She activated her device. The quantum crystals embedded in its makeshift housing began to pulse with an odd rhythm, slightly out of sync with the chamber's ambient lighting. "Current quantum communication assumes we need to force particles to maintain entanglement across space. But what if space itself is already entangled?" Holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing real-time quantum readings. This modified resonator doesn't try to maintain artificial entanglement. Instead, it detects and utilizes the natural quantum entanglement that exists in the fabric of space-time itself. "Impossible," shouted one of the Meridian scientists. "The energy requirements alone ruled. would be massive if we were creating entanglement. Sarah interrupted. But we're not. We're just tapping into what's already there, like surfing a wave instead of trying to create one. She pressed a sequence of commands into her control panel. I set up a receiver on Earth, coordinated with exactly this moment. According to current theory, the quantum degradation over that distance should make communication impossible. But watch. The resonator hummed, its crystals shifting through colors that seemed to bend in impossible ways. For a moment, nothing happened. Sarah could feel the weight of hundreds of skeptical eyes upon her. Then suddenly, the holographic displays erupted with data. That's impossible," whispered a Volian scientist, their tentacles writhing in agitation. "The quantum coherence is perfect. There's no degradation at all." "Better than that," Sarah said, her confidence growing. "Check the timestamp on the return signal." The chamber erupted in chaos as the implications became clear. The return signal had arrived before Sarah had finished sending the initial transmission. Several council members began shouting at once, their various universal translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. High Commissioner Lyra raised their energy form to full brightness, commanding silence. "Explain," they demanded, their tone carrying both wonder and concern. "Remember Wheeler's delayed choice experiment?" Sarah asked, warming to her subject. "When we stop trying to force quantum mechanics to play by our rules, and instead work with its natural tendencies, we find that time itself is part of the equation. The universe doesn't just connect points in space, it connects moments in time." She gestured to her device. "This resonator doesn't just detect spatial quantum entanglement. It reads temporal entanglement patterns. The signal isn't traveling through space, it's traveling through the quantum interconnectedness of spacetime itself." But the implications, Delegate Morrow's crystalline form had dulled to a pale shade of shock. "If this theory is correct, our entire understanding of causality needs revision," Sarah completed. "Yes, but isn't that exactly what science is supposed to be about? Question everything, even our most basic assumptions." High Commissioner Lyra's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. "You realize, Student Chen, that if we accept this demonstration as valid, it will require a complete redesign of our entire communication network. Years of work, massive resources." "With respect, Commissioner," Sarah replied, "we don't have years. The current network is failing. Colonies are being cut off. We need a solution now, not after years of committee reviews and protocol adjustments." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Humanity may be new to galactic society, but we have something valuable to contribute. We're good at thinking outside established parameters, at finding simple solutions to complex problems. Sometimes the best way forward isn't to build something bigger or more complex. It's to step back and look at the problem from a completely different angle." The chamber fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the soft hum of her resonator, still maintaining its impossible connection across light years of space and time. In that moment, Sarah knew she had done more than just solve a technical problem. She had demonstrated that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society might not be their technology or their knowledge, but their ability to think differently. The weeks following Sarah's demonstration transformed the Galactic Science Academy into a hive of unprecedented activity. Research labs that had once been strictly segregated by species now buzzed with collaborative energy. In Lab Complex 7, Sarah found herself at the center of it all, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, all eager to understand and build upon her breakthrough. "The temporal entanglement patterns are holding steady across all test distances," reported Dr. Call, a Volian quantum specialist whose tentacles were currently interfaced with 3 different monitoring stations simultaneously. "We've successfully established instantaneous communication with the Andromeda colony cluster." Sarah nodded, studying the data streams floating in the holographic display before her. "Any sign of degradation in the signal strength?" "None," came the mechanical precision of Vex 427's voice. The robot had become one of her strongest advocates since the demonstration. Their initial skepticism transformed into fascinated support. In fact, we're detecting something unexpected. The signal clarity appears to improve with distance. Of course it does, came a new voice. Delegate Moros glided into the lab, their crystalline form now showing hints of respect where there had once been only disdain. Because it's not actually traveling through space at all, is it, Student Chen? Or should I say, Professor Chen? Sarah looked up in surprise. Professor? Dr. Xylith's membrane rippled with joy as they entered behind Moros. The council's decision was unanimous. You're being offered a full professorship and your own research division. The youngest in Academy history, I might add. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. I appreciate the honor, but this isn't just my work anymore. Everyone in this lab has contributed to developing the practical applications. Precisely why you deserve the position, Moros stated. You didn't just solve a technical problem. You changed how we approach problems altogether. Do you know what's happening across the Academy right now? Sarah had heard rumors, but she gestured for Moros to continue. Every department, from xenobiology to dark matter physics, is re-examining their fundamental assumptions. Research teams are being restructured to include perspectives from multiple species, including, especially, humans. The crystalline being's form shimmered with what might have been amusement. You've started quite the revolution, Professor Chen. A junior researcher burst into the lab, their anti-gravity pods whirring with excitement. The medical division just reported a breakthrough. They applied temporal entanglement principles to cellular regeneration. They're saying it could revolutionize trauma treatment. And the archaeology department is talking about using temporal resonance to study artifact decay patterns, added Catal. Something about reading the quantum echoes of past events. Sarah felt slightly overwhelmed. This was far beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first challenged Dr. Xylith's lecture. We need to be careful, she cautioned. With this kind of technology, we need to proceed with both enthusiasm and wisdom, interrupted High Commissioner Lyra, their energy form materializing in the lab. The others quickly made way for the council leader, which is precisely why the council has another proposal for you, Professor Chen. Sarah straightened, suddenly aware of the gravity in the commissioner's tone. We're establishing a new division, the Department of Theoretical Innovation. Its purpose will be to challenge established scientific principles across all disciplines, to find these, what did you call them? Simple solutions to complex problems. Lyra's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. We want you to lead it. But there are far more qualified. Sarah began. Are there? Dr. Xylith interjected. You've demonstrated exactly what we need. The ability to see past our preconceptions, to question even our most basic assumptions. But more importantly, you've shown how to bring different perspectives together productively. Sarah looked around the lab, at the Volian scientist interfaced with machines designed by robotic researchers, at the crystalline being discussing theory with energy constructs, at the dozens of species working together in ways that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. The galaxy is changing, Lyra continued. We're discovering that many of our limitations were self-imposed, born of our certainty that we already understood everything. Humanity's greatest gift to us might be the reminder that there's always another way to look at things. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, of the opportunity being offered. This wasn't just about quantum physics anymore. It was about fostering a new way of thinking throughout galactic society. When do we start? The lab erupted in excited chatter as various researchers began proposing projects and possibilities. But beneath the enthusiasm, Sarah caught something else in their discussions, a new humility, a willingness to admit that even the most advanced civilizations still had much to learn. From her workstation, her original jury-rigged resonator still hummed softly, its mismatched parts a physical reminder that progress often came from unexpected combinations. She smiled, remembering something her first physics teacher on Earth had told her. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, It is stranger than we can imagine. But maybe, she thought, watching the diverse group of beings around her collaborate with newfound enthusiasm, that just means we need to imagine differently. Together. 1 year after her breakthrough, Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the Academy's newly constructed Temporal Sciences Wing, watching ships arrive for the first Galactic Conference on Innovative Thinking. The space around the station sparkled with vessels of all shapes and sizes, from crystalline Quantarian research ships to the organic vessels of the Meridians. Quite a change from last year, remarked Vex 427, joining her at the window. The robot's frame had been upgraded with new quantum sensors, allowing them to perceive the subtle temporal waves that they now knew permeated the universe. Though I admit, I'm still adjusting to being wrong. Sarah smiled. Being wrong is the first step to learning something new. My old mentor on Earth used to say that science advances one funeral at a time. But maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Indeed, came the resonant voice of High Commissioner Lyra as they materialized nearby. Your Department of Theoretical Innovation has already catalyzed more breakthroughs in 1 year than we saw in the previous decade, though not all of them were quite what we expected. Sarah knew what they meant. The application of temporal entanglement principles had led to discoveries far beyond simple communication. The Volians had developed a way to perceive probable future events by reading temporal quantum patterns. The Meridians had revolutionized space travel by utilizing natural space-time, folds that had always existed but gone unnoticed. Change can be uncomfortable, Sarah acknowledged, watching as a group of young students, representing at least 6 different species, hurried past, engaged in animated discussion. But look at them. They're not bound by our old limitations. They're asking questions we never thought to ask. Dr. Xylith emerged from a nearby temporal transit pod, their membrane showing patterns of excitement. The first sessions are about to begin. The presentation halls are already over capacity. Who would have thought? Delegate Moros commented, joining their growing group, that our next great leap forward would come not from building more powerful machines, but from learning to see what was already there. Their crystalline form had evolved over the past year, incorporating organic elements in a fusion of technologies that would have been unthinkable before. Sarah turned from the window to face her colleagues, her friends. That's the real breakthrough, isn't it? Not the quantum mechanics or the temporal engineering. It's the understanding that progress doesn't always mean making things more complex. Sometimes it means stepping back and seeing the simple truths that were there all along. A soft chime sounded through the station, announcing the conference's imminent start. As they made their way to the main hall, Sarah reflected on the changes she'd witnessed. The rigid hierarchies of species and technological advancement were breaking down, replaced by a new appreciation for diverse perspectives and unconventional thinking. The main hall was packed with beings from across the galaxy. As Sarah took her place at the podium, she saw not just scientists and academics, but artists, philosophers, and thinkers of all kinds. The boundaries between disciplines, like those between species, had begun to blur. Welcome to the first Galactic Conference on Innovative Thinking, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. A year ago, I stood before the council with a device held together with spare parts and hope. Today, we stand together on the brink of a new era of discovery. She gestured to the diverse crowd before her. But the real discovery wasn't about quantum mechanics or temporal physics. It was about us, about how we think, how we work together, how we approach problems. We learned that the greatest barriers to progress often exist in our own minds. The holographic displays around the hall came to life, showing images of new technologies, breakthrough discoveries, and most importantly, beings of different species working together in ways never before imagined. The universe, Sarah continued, doesn't care about our preconceptions or our established theories. It doesn't distinguish between advanced and primitive technologies. It simply is. Our job is to understand it, not by forcing it to conform to our expectations, but by learning to see it as it truly is. She paused, looking out at the assembled faces, some human, some alien, some barely comprehensible to human perception. We stand at a crossroads. The old barriers are falling away. The question now is not what we can build or what we can achieve, but what we can imagine together. As applause filled the hall, expressed in hundreds of different ways by hundreds of different species, Sarah caught sight of a group of new human exchange students entering the back of the hall. Their eyes were wide with wonder, much as hers had been when she first arrived at the academy. She smiled, knowing that they would find a very different galaxy than the one she had encountered. One where humanity's gift for unconventional thinking was not just tolerated but celebrated, where the simplest solution was no longer dismissed in favor of the most complex, where being primitive or advanced mattered less than being innovative and open-minded. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities that no single species could have imagined alone. And somewhere in the quantum fabric of space-time itself, Sarah knew the universe was waiting to reveal even more of its secrets, not to those who built the biggest machines or developed the most complex theories, but to those who learned to see with new eyes and think with open minds. The end.